May I, on behalf of the People's Progressive Party, once again issue our deepest condolences to the families and relatives of all of our servicemen who perished in this horrific accident. This accident has affected everyone in our country. It has affected our national psyche, and we're so pleased with the outpouring of sympathy from all quarters of our society and their love for the servicemen who departed. Most of you would have been following the engagements that are currently taking place in St. Vincent and the Grenadines between our delegation led by President Ali and the Venezuelan delegation led by President Maduro. NCN has reported that President Ali met with his CARICOM counterparts, and CARICOM also met, including the representative from Brazil, met with President Maduro, and right now both leaders and their delegations are in a meeting. Since morning, I spoke with the president several times, and he has been, he's in great spirit, and we know that he will defend the positions of this country admirably in any such engagement. I have full confidence in the strength of our delegation and the robustness in which they will pursue our national interests. Now, so far we've received full solidarity from everyone in our country, first of all for the border controversy and the ICJ process. We've also had national solidarity in fighting off Maduro's evil intent to our country. And we have had support from the opposition on this meeting, a written letter by the leader of the opposition saying he supports dialogue, especially dialogue aimed at ensuring that we keep peace in our region. So I was a bit surprised that at the press conference today held by the leader of the opposition, that he would return to this matter in a manner that is not helpful, particularly given that those discussions are taking place at this very moment. And I must say that he steered out clear of the rhetoric of some of those who are trying to lead him to make statements that are hostile not to our national well-being and our national interests, namely Bench Cup and Adam Harris. The questions were biased, jaundiced, and heavily loaded so that they would have elicited a response that would be anti-national at best. Mr. Norton, to his credit, steered clear of those. He however pointed out that when asked that whether they were invited, he conceded that they were invited to be part of the delegation, but they did not participate. And were they in government, they would have done differently. Now, I do not want to pursue a partisan approach today, and because I have my views on what would have happened had they been in government. But I'm not going to pursue that and explore that publicly at this moment, because right now we need full solidarity with our delegation that is there in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He said two things of note, though, that we should have had a settled agenda and demanded Venezuela de-escalate the situation prior to the meeting. Now, clearly, Mr. Norton has unfortunately not participated in similar meetings because he was, as I pointed out, junior staff at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I've had many engagements with heads of state in more meetings that I can think of, some very contentious, including a similar one with the president of Suriname in Canoan, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, when we had the gunboat from Suriname try to force the drilling operations in Guyana, the first one done by CGX. And so it was a very difficult meeting. And when you go to these meetings, you have to ensure that your positions are not compromised, first of all, in whole or by creeping or by stealth. And we are fully aware of that. President Ali knows that. You know, he's been fully briefed, he knows that. So sometimes the meetings are fluid, particularly when they're mediated by third parties. So there has to be some element of fluidity. But if you want peace in the region, the de-escalation cannot be a prior condition. the meeting is set up to talk about de-escalation. In fact, I'm surprised that Mr. Norton is claiming that he didn't have a settled agenda, but elements of the meeting were already known or what would be discussed. And this came clearly from CARICOM itself. CARICOM made it clear that after the caucus with their heads that took place on Friday, December 8th, that they believe that there should be an engagement between the two leaders. They said the statement that was issued subsequent to that meeting, which was held on the 8th of December, stated that they firmly supported Guyana in the pursuance of the resolution of the border controversy at the ICJ. They made it clear that they wanted CARICOM to remain a zone of peace, and therefore they said that the meeting should focus on a number of things. First, the de-escalation of the conflict, and for the appropriate dialogue between the leaders of Guyana and Venezuela to ensure peaceful coexistence, the application and respect for international law, and the avoidance of the use of threats of force. They set an agenda clearly. They clearly outlined the objectives of the talks. Peaceful coexistence, de-escalation of the conflict, application and respect of international law, and the avoidance of use of threats of force. 4 key elements for which we support wholeheartedly. And they also made it clear that they supported our position at the ICJ. So to claim now that you didn't know the purpose of the meeting, implied that you didn't know the purpose of the meeting. The purpose of the meeting was explicitly set out in the agenda, the statement from CARICOM leaders when they issued that. We too, in Guyana, we made it clear on the 9th of December, there was a press release issued by Guyana. And among other things, it said, President Ali reiterated that Guyana's land boundary is not up for discussion as is currently before the ICJ. That's one, position one. Our land boundary is not up for discussion at this meeting. It's at the ICJ, it shall remain there. 2, President Ali will continue to engage our bilateral partners on defense cooperation. So we will continue to engage our partners on defense cooperation. 3, Guyana is clear that the advancement of our development agenda will not be compromised at the meeting. We're not going to agree to anything that seeks to stop companies operating in our territory, sovereign Guyanese territory, because Maduro has issued decrees saying that these companies have 3 months to exit the area. That's not going to be part of our discussion or compromise. And 4, we are committed to international peace and security in the promotion of good neighborly relations. Our positions are already issued in a press release on the 9th of December. For him to claim now that he's a bit uneasy we may compromise on the process before the ICJ, when we've explicitly pointed out that that is a non-negotiable, it's a bit disingenuous. And therefore, I don't think that the meeting, the press conference he had has been helpful to the process. The process is ongoing now. It's ongoing now. But I'm also pleased that he debunked some of the wild men who were there just to start trouble, including pointing out Adam Harris, saying that a large number of Venezuelans have been registered. You recall the earlier claim by Apton, and Mr. Norton had pointed out that their checks indicated that that is not so, registered to be voted. That they were told this, but when they checked it, it was not so. Something that we've been saying all along, that they're here, there are quite a few, most of them are Guyanese, but they have not been exploited for political purposes. We didn't bring them from Venezuela to vote for the PPP, as was implied by wild cards like Amanza Walton and the others, somehow implying we brought them here to vote. They fled oppression, they fled hunger. And they were claiming that we had a mass registration of these people. Even Mr. Norton pointed that out today, that his subsequent checks pointed out that this is not so. So we remain engaged. We have a good delegation. We have major consultations taking place, and the meeting, you'd have a report from our delegation in St. Vincent later in the day. As the meeting unfolds, but you can rest assured that there shall be no compromising of our national position, as I outlined earlier. There shall be no compromising. We can't tell you right now what the outcome of the other elements are, because we've committed ourselves to have a region remain a zone of peace. But one thing that will not happen is the compromising of national interests. We have done this in the People's Progressive Party hundreds of times before in the period when we were in government. And very, very, very contentious circumstances and intense situations. People don't recall that in the past. And we've emerged from all of them stronger. We emerged from the Suriname conflict with a settled border, which had not happened in a century. A settled border, by invoking the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And so we will not flinch in the face of these negotiations. I've seen right now, given that the COP28 just ended, right now if you look at the global news, you will see it dominated by news items from COP. Depending on where you stand, some people are seeing it as a success nobody sees the outcome of COP as an overwhelming success. Some are seeing it as partial movement forward, and others are very disappointed as to the outcome. So, and that depends on their perspective or which interests they represent. But there are a few things we have been in the public domain as commenting on already, and I will just make sure that I, today, since COP has come to an end, reiterate some of the positions. First of all, we are disappointed that Article 6, which dealt with carbon markets, did not make any advance. That's the first position. We thought that advancing the carbon markets will create greater incentives for countries that are forested to ensure that they can raise money through the market mechanism to outcompete alternate use and therefore preserve their forests without taking away the forest as a development tool in the arsenal of these countries. Because people live in the forest, they earn from the forest. The forests are not museum pieces for anybody in the northern part of our world. And we had a setback on that. And it just demonstrates something that we've been saying. It's an age-old fight. We started in 2007 to push for this market-based mechanism. We did not succeed because the global north was unprepared to put up the money. We embarked on our own route. In Guyana, a unique example, we launched one of the first low-carbon development strategies in the world. When we launched it, you recall the opposition at that time, they were opposed to it. We had a bilateral agreement with Norway. The opposition at that time wrote Norway saying money should not come to Guyana. We persisted with all of this. The money, we earned $220 million US dollars. The irony of this all is that most of the money were available to APNU when they got into office to spend. That the same money that they did not want Norway to flow to give to Guyana from the sale of our forest carbon. They utilized some of those resources for the ICT program in the hinterland, and they even used some of the money to finance, $2 million US dollars of it to finance Mr. Granger's the Green State strategy, to pay for it, but they missed another opportunity. The agreement came to an end, the Norwegian agreement, in 2015. From 2015 to 2020, we did not earn any money. In 2020, we got into office. We scrapped the Green State strategy. We launched an expanded low-carbon development strategy. We returned to the ART. ART had been established as a global standard for jurisdictional scale certification. We submitted our case, ART accepted it. We had a robust, nearly a year and a half of the verification on the ground of our credits. We managed to get our entire forest certified. Credits were issued. We traded 30% of those credits for $750 million, including credit, what we call legacy credit. From the 2015 to the 2020 period, when we were out of office, we went back and sought financing for those credits because the services had been performed, but there was no mechanism. APNU did not work on a mechanism for having that. We're now gonna, a lot, 500 projects, 15% already went to the indigenous communities, 85% is just sitting there in an account. From the first release of the $750 million, $122.5 million US sitting in an account now to be spent on adaptation measures to keep our country safer from the sea rise or from unduly heavy rainfall. All of that is sitting there. And now we have the potential of raising $2.5 billion. What we did based on the other forested countries, because of the non-movement in Article 6, those countries, unfortunately, a lot of very good countries that have good policies in Africa and the surrounding the forest, who have preserved the forest, they're not going to get that financing at magnitude like we got, because we struck out on our own. But they're working within the framework of the UN system. And unfortunately, it would delay these countries getting resources, which they should get because they perform a service, their forests, to the global community. And so we're very, very disappointed that this would not happen. Not so much from our perspective, because we'll continue doing our work in the voluntary markets. That's where we're done. But right now you have no compliance market. So we will continue, but I'm very saddened because you have some really great practices in a lot of countries, particularly in Africa. I'm speaking about, we've worked with them. I work with Gabon, many other countries there, and they deserve to get the payments now, but they will not get because of what happened here at COP. The second thing is adaptation. They struck out all of the language that spoke about the rich countries must provide predictable financing for adaptation. So everybody talks about adaptation. They know that the small countries need to adapt to climate change, because already the consequences of the accumulated concentration of greenhouse gases will cause catastrophic events or adverse weather events in many of these countries that we've already seen, like in the Caribbean with hurricanes and stuff like that have systemic impact. So everyone recognizes the need to do it. They recognize that without it, countries are going to, it's almost face an existential threat. They recognize that the countries don't have the capability, their financial capacity to do it, and yet they're unprepared to assist them to do it, the developed countries. And so when the language came up that they must provide predictable long-term financing, they struck that out of the text. And so we leave COP28 without any long-term predictable financing at scale for adaptation for these countries. And it's a pity. Luckily, in our case, again, we're utilizing our money to finance adaptation. I just told you the money we are earning from the sale of forest carbon to make sure that we can grow crops that are climate resilient. We can tackle droughts and water-related problems. We can climate-proof many of our infrastructure here in Guyana, so our people will not suffer the same sorts of consequences. But again, it's a loss for countries like in the region that don't have a means of earning through the mitigation side, so they have to wait on funding from international community, and their fiscal situations are such that they can't borrow more. They can't borrow more because they're already stressed in borrowing, already reached almost their limits in borrowing. So that's the second disappointment that I personally share. The Loss and Damage Fund was established. This is for previous losses. It was established, so there was some progress in this, and they had about 500 million, under 500 million of pledges. But when you think about $30 trillion, that is the estimate, and some people estimate it at $250 billion to trillions of dollars, $30 trillion, depending on how you look at the numbers or who does the numbers, you would see that this is a paltry sum. And then the mechanism for its handing it out, although they appointed a board and they would deal with it through the World Bank, I believe that it would be so bureaucratic, it will take a significant while before it gets into the hands of these countries, but it's a tiny sum. Just think about $400 odd million for the entire entire world for loss and damage. In our case, if we get the same rates that we got for our forest carbon, the 30%, and we sell the remaining 70%, we will raise over 2.5 billion US dollars. The 15% or the share for the Amerindian communities will be over 400 million US dollars. Just for our Amerindian community, they've pledged $400 million for the world for adaptation at COP. So it just gives you a sense of magnitude about what is needed and how much is available and how much is pledged. And then there's been a talk about they're phasing out of fossil fuel, phasing down. And the agreement was the transitioning. Now, everybody says we must transition from use of fossil fuel. But how is this being done? Will the US stop producing? The US was the largest producer of oil this year. The largest producer of oil. Would they stop using gasoline to run the vehicles? Would they stop the building coal-fired power plants? I saw there's an agreement to phase out or phase down unabated coal, but not to stop it. Not to stop it. And coal is even the most polluting form of fossil fuel you can find now. It's worse than bunker C or diesel, and significantly worse than natural gas that we're using now as a transitional fuel. So talking about tripling renewable energy without finding the trillions of dollars needed to invest in that, and leaving it up to countries to do it without any firm target or penalties for not doing it, is just like leaving it to wishful thinking. Because countries are going to operate on the basis of what's in their best interest. And if it's going to, by phasing out fossil fuel, it will drive up costs significantly. They're going to reverse, like the UK did that. When the cost of energy to the household skyrocketed and it became a political issue, the same country that was championing end of coal and phasing out fossil fuel then gave 100 licenses to explore for oil and also reopen some coal plants. So this here is wishful thinking unless it is backed up by investment dollars, and secondly, by a major reduction in demand for fossil fuel. So in Guyana's case, we're a producer of fossil fuel, now oil. We support a carbon price. We support the removal of subsidies on fossil fuel production. Countries that produce oil don't do that globally, but we've supported it. We have a zero flaring policy. The world will end flaring in 2030. That's what they said, they pledged. Not a world. Some companies that are producing oil and gas made a voluntary pledge to end flaring, routine flaring by 2030. We have ended it. There's carbon tax to that. So in Guyana's case, we've supported all these positions. We've said, if you reduce the global demand for fossil fuel, then the global supply would automatically be reduced, because the prices, once the demand falls and the supply remains high, then the prices would fall to a level where it would become uneconomic to produce it. And therefore, there needs movement on this. Now, this brings me to the next point. So we've had a lot of discussion here about salary increases. And I want you to remember that last analysis that I just did about what's happening globally with fossil fuel. So somehow there is this feeling There's an obsession about percentages every year. You hear one person say 70%, another 15%, another 5%, 3%. But any salary increase that is not grounded in an analysis of your economy, the state of your finances, and doesn't take account of the future revenue stream will be conjecture, and it will not be sustainable. We've seen this happen in many, many countries in the past. And what do I mean by all of this? So first of all, the government has an obligation. We have 54,000 public servants earning $87 billion wages bill. 54,000. The public servants are very important to managing a country. They work with the administration of many of our programs in Guyana. We have ensured that working conditions have improved. We have ensured that salaries have increased for our public servants. In some categories now, at the lower level in the public service, people are leaving the private sector to come and work because we have a minimum wage now in the public service that is higher than in many private sector agencies. They're coming to work with the public service now. In the past, it wasn't so. Almost everybody is going the other way. In the upper categories, we still have people exodus from the private sector for some skill types, like maybe the engineers and for accountants, ACCA, etc. But at the lower end, we are very competitive with the private sector, public sector wages. Now, but when you run a country, you have to take care of your public servants. They're your people who help you to administer the country. But you have a duty to all the people of the country too, who are not public servants, who work, who contribute to national wealth, who pay taxes. They also have to benefit from the treasury. And how do you get them to benefit? So you have to think about that too. You can't get them to benefit by paying higher wages because they're not working with you. So you also have to make sure that they, in a way, they pay less taxes. Now, in the period 5 years under APNU, the tax take alone increased by over $80-something billion. You go and check the numbers under APNU between 2015 to 2020, they increased tax collections by over $80 billion. And we did not have major new economic activities. In fact, if you look at the production profile of the country, almost in every sector we saw a decline in output. You check it. It's there in all our estimates, public documents. The first year when we got into office, 4 weeks after we got into office, in the middle of a global pandemic, we produced a budget. Normally a budget takes 6 months to produce because you start preparation 6 months before you do that. In the first budget, we reduced the taxes, we reversed taxes when annualized is equivalent to $40 billion. It don't sound like that because people don't get the $40 billion. But when you remove VAT on electricity, on water, on data, on food items, you reverse a lot of the fee charges, etc. When you annualize, calculate how many billions in each, it was equivalent to $40 billion that people pay less So that was $40 billion immediately less than APNU had or collecting in taxes. But it was also a boost to production because we remove the VAT on machinery and equipment for every sector. They had put VAT on machinery and equipment for the mining sector, for agriculture, on manufacturing, everything, and which led to people not investing. Because if you got to buy an excavator and you have to pay now $5 million more in taxes, which is what they had put on the 14% VAT, why would you invest in that? We gave an incentive to production. And that is why you've seen a 9% growth in the non-oil sector, a massive growth and you need this to keep the economy diversified. So you don't become like most oil producers where only one sector you rely on for most of your income. And if that sector collapses, you're in big trouble, like what happened in Venezuela and one time in Trinidad and many other oil producing countries. You need that. So that's the first point. You have to ensure that when you have a budget, so I see people calculate, oh, we brought in $200 billion this year, $1 billion US from the oil and gas sector in the budget, and $1 billion US, which is 200 billion or so, Guyana. And how come only 6.5%? But they didn't say that the school kids now are getting 10.5 billion more. And the pensioners are now getting 14.5 billion more in their increase. And the thing about it, it's annualized. I see somebody said, how 6.5% now? But you had to pay this year, from this year resources, for the last 3 or 4 years, it becomes annualized. It's recurrent. When you increase salaries, it's recurrent. You have to pay for this year, last year, the year before increase, etc. Because that's part of your salary. So they only look at 6.5% and say, oh, 6.5 of 200 billion is this. But what about last year's increases? And when you look at it totally, the growth in the wage bill, for it's 20-something billion dollars over the last couple of years. And then you have to, so the part-time workers now, we managed to get some more there to work now. They're getting 40,000, that's another $10 billion. Joint services bonus, you got to look at it. Then housing, we're investing in housing, that's for our people. Now we have invested over $100 billion in housing because it's subsidized. To do 50,000 house lots, it means a benefit to 50,000 of our people. That some of whom may be public servants too, but there are others who will benefit from this. It's not only wages and salaries you can spend on. You have to spend on roads, electricity. We subsidize electricity now. We've absorbed all of the costs because of higher oil prices and carry it on the treasury. That's a benefit to everyone. We restore pension, the subsidy to the pensioners. Where do you think you fund this from? People don't look at all of those. They think, oh, 6.5% alone. So the problem with recurrent things is that many countries do that. When they get the first oil money, they splurge. And when you increase recurrent budget, what happens in subsequent years? So I just told you about the last point I was speaking about on the climate negotiation was the longevity of oil. How long will oil be with us and what will be the price for a barrel of oil if you have a reduction in global demand? What if it plummets to a point where it's not sustainable to even produce oil? And you've already increased all of your costs to a point where, you know, everybody thinks you can't cut it back now. It's already part of your wages. You're planning. That's why I'm saying you have to plan for the future too. When you look at wages, I see some people complaining from the private sector. One man from a company, a security company, saying, oh, 6.5, it should be 15. And he doesn't even pay, he won a staff lowest paid among security companies. Don't even pay the NIS for their staff. Some of them. You know, people say that. And so I see some newspapers criticizing it. I hope they will give their journalists 100% increase. But they would not do that because they'd say, oh, the ads, you know, we're not getting enough ads, our finances are there, we got to pay electricity bill. They would run it that way because that's how you have to look at it as a business. Running government is a similar thing. Anybody who tells you otherwise will doom this country. They don't want to face facts, so they like Norton and the others, and they're up, oh, give 100% because they're out of government. When they were in government, it's paltry sums. They gave in one hand, took away the children grant on the other hand. Oh, everything now, oh, we don't have oil money. But you increase, you don't have oil money, then you started getting oil money. The first oil money, you got 18 million US dollars, you hit it. Now we now faced with Venezuela criticizing us that Exxon paid for our ICJ process. You see that, because that is the explanation that Trotman got. I stood up in Parliament and I said, you don't need 18 million US signing bonus to pay for the ICJ case hidden away from the Treasury or the central bank balance sheet. You put it in the Treasury. If you need 100 million US dollars, you come to this Parliament, the PPP will support you. You will get 100 million US to pursue this case. You didn't need to go and do fancy footworks about it because you had an opposition at that time that was fully supportive of our move to the ICJ, whatever it costs. Put us in trouble. They had money. It's how they use it. They, as I told you, the $80 billion they collected in more taxes. How did they spend it? Vehicles, massive amount of vehicles, massive rentals, over $1 billion per year more in rental for buildings for the growth. 1.6, nearly $2 billion more per annum in food for government. That sort of thing. I can go down the list, a long list. So now this claim, oh, we didn't have oil money. Any road they see or anything, we didn't have oil money. They had money. They had a lot of money. It's how they spent it. And then on one hand, they gave us a slightly higher percentage increase, took away the contract gratuity from the public servants, the doctors. The doctors used to get contract gratuity, 22.5% every 6 months. So they would end up with their salary, and like most public servants, they end up with their salary, and if you get 22.5%, then you end up with another maybe 3 months of wages for the year, 22.5% every 6 months. And then the 1 month vacation allowance, you end up with 16 months pay. All of those who are on contract in government nearly end up with 16 months pay per year. If you have a contract gratuity of 22.5%. They took it away from the public servants. And they said you must go under contract on the fixed establishment. So you had to now become a member of the public service. We lost hundreds of our doctors because of that. They have very short memory, very, very short memory. And they're shedding crocodile tears about this increase, etc. But anyone who tells you otherwise, they're not facing facts. The same people who talk about this and write about this, I would advocate that they pay their staff what they say that we should pay in the public service. They would pay the same thing. So on this matter, it's carefully thought out. We want to make sure that we can sustain it in the long run. We want our people to continue to benefit. The 12 new hospitals, we have to build them, we have to finance them, but public servants and all the other people in this country will get a benefit too. That is the benefits to our people. Our children and women in 2 years' time will be able to go to a hospital that specializes in care for children and women. a European standard hospital, so that if they have complicated cases, we can deliver the best care in the world. We already have 21,000 people on scholarships that's been funded. We'd have many more before the end of this term. University education will be free. That's where we spend some of our money. We can't just spend everything on recurrent expenditure and can't sustain it. It is a balanced approach, and that's how we approach these matters. And it's the only way you can sustainably run a country. Not by some of the, do this, do that, with no thought behind it. And every expenditure we make has a clear thought behind it. So I'll just end there. Thank you.
Can you give us, I have at least 3 questions here. You want me to list them all at once? The first is...
just 1 minute.
Yeah, has the Whitfield project field development plan been completed, and will it be approved before year-end?
I didn't get
the 6th oil project, the Whiptail project.
Yes, we're pursuing it. We're pursuing it. I told you already exact dates. Please get it from Vic. He tracks this on a daily basis. But yes, the idea is, I don't know what timeline we had set, the outside date, but we're working on it. And there is no retreat on it. Let me just say that there is no retreat. We want it done. We want the approval to be issued as soon as possible without compromising our assessment, technical assessment, and the environmental assessment. Without compromising that. We're not going to push people based on a fake deadline to just complete their work before they've had a chance to thoroughly assess the applications.
Secondly, can you give us an update on the gas strategy, and also update on when the discussions, the negotiations surrounding the auction of oil blocks will come to a close?
The discussions are ongoing. That's what I know. On the gas strategy, I've seen a document from Minister Vikram Bharat about all the comments that we receive, a large number of comments that we receive. The next step is to incorporate those comments and then have a total review. So that will be the next stage. I must say that I've been also a bit delinquent in this, moving this forward because of what's happening now, and but that's the next stage.
Okay, and thirdly, can you give us an explanation as to why ExxonMobil is allowed to offer multi-million-dollar contracts without getting government's approval?
I think that the ministry is notified about it, and especially when you deal with long lead items, often you have to, like when we were dealing with the pipelines for the gas to energy project, we had to make sure that we award those contracts even ahead of time, even before we completed the contract award for the power plant and the gas facility. So often when you deal with this, you need to keep the work to meet timelines. You need to run ahead in the planning process. Whether those the cost issue is always a factor, and that is why we have to now, consistent with the new law, we have to get a handle surrounding costs and appropriate costs. Now, if you look at the audit, one of the terms of reference, in fact the terms of reference of the audits, they have to examine whether the the costs claimed by ExxonMobil. So whether it's leasing costs for an FPSO or cost of acquisition of an FPSO, whether those are based on market standards. And if they exceed market standards, we have room to challenge it. If our challenge is successful, if we can demonstrate that the costs are inflated, then they would have to be removed from the cost bank and go to profit oil. So there are some mechanisms there, but it's not ex ante, it's ex post. That is how you address it.
And my final question is, you said Guyana's debt is not a worry, but will the government be willing to share the fixed interest rates on Guyana's current debt with the public?
The fixed interest rate, it's multiple debts. It's multiple loans. So each would have a different interest rate. Each would have a different interest rate. So the only two variable, and which could easily be shared with you because they're public documents, and I don't see a problem with sharing the fixed interest rates because, and you will see that in some cases, the multilateral financing is even more expensive than private financing, which we have discovered recently because of some international classifications. So for example, the OECD, if you look at my presentation, they bring me to a point, which I didn't mention much. So at COP 28 rather, I shared a panel with the head of the World Bank, the head of the African Development Bank, the head of the Inter-American Development Bank, several European banks, development banks, the heads of those, ministers from the UK, Prime Minister Motley, etc. So we were discussing the pause clause for debts on the UKEF, which is debt by private institutions, but the export agency from the UK would guarantee these debts. And in our case, the loan for the hospital, the children's hospital, is through a UKEF facility. So what they now decided to do, that they will put in a pause clause. It is, in case of natural disaster, you can miss 2 payments or 2 years of the servicing of the loan. So it gives you a breather. Like many CARICOM countries that are in that position, if they have a hurricane now, they don't have to take the resources to pay back these debts immediately. These would be capitalized at the end of the loan, and they can have those resources available for that period for rebuilding. So it's a good initiative. It's an advance now on what we had been arguing for a very long time. Maybe 15 years ago at the heads of government meeting, we argued for this sort of instrument, including others like insurance, climate resilience, insurance. We argue for contingent lines of credit that are triggered if you have a weather-related event that's not dependent on you going back to the institutions and waiting ages to get the approval. So we're pleased about this. But I made a point there that at this meeting, that whilst we are pleased with this, that there are many hidden costs to loans taken by developing countries. In our case, we have a stronger negotiating position now because our future income in a single year could be more than all of our outstanding debt, significantly more than total outstanding debt for the whole country. Very few countries find themselves in that position. So we have pretty strong bargaining power. But many other countries in the world, they don't, and they have to go to the market because they can't find multilateral financing any longer, particularly in Africa too, and some Latin American countries. So what matters to them is the price of the credit, the interest rate, which is the price of the credit. But sometimes, so we're going to offer here this pause clause, but the interest premium could be already be very high and outsized because of lack of transparency. So what happens, for example, the OECD classify countries. So you have 8 categories depending on their perceived risk of you being able to repay your debts. In our case, it hardly moved from the time of the 80s when we were declared uncreditworthy to now when we have some of the lowest debt figures in the world. So in our case, we are in category 6 of the 8. So that requires you to pay an upfront risk premium of 13%. We've now gotten it reduced to 5, and it will be reduced further because we've made the argument now you're using the old data to assess us. But we can do that. So I'm saying that we don't participate, the developing world, in this classification. It's not a transparent mechanism. But once you're placed on this category, then it has an implication for your cost of credit, because apart from the risk premium, then you get charged either a LIBOR or C4 rate, and then you may have to the other administrative charges. Combined, they're very costly. So that was my point here at the meeting, that we can't just look at this. We have to look at all of the factors that affect prices to these countries, the price of credit. I saw also they're doing debt for nature swaps. So some countries are now they exchange their debt for preserving the forest. Small sums so far, but a big hype around it globally. But a private institution, when a country pursues a debt for nature swap, the private institutions and the credit rating agencies, they treat that as a default. So when you go to borrow subsequently, your interest premium gets increased significantly. And so it's counterproductive often to do that. And that is, if you're tackling the availability of financing for the developing world, particularly to finance their deficits, to invest in education and health and sustainability, and then climate financing. Sometimes what happens globally is you have unintended consequences, and it puts these countries in more problems. So all of this is just to point out to you about, so you will see, even in our fixed debt, you will see one institution will have one rate, another would have one rate, etc. It's because of their internal pricing policy. The fixed debt, the only good thing about the fixed debt is that if you have an interest going up, then you're not faced with the consequences, like many countries saw their debt move from maybe 3% or 0 to 7 interest. And imagine if you have $5 billion of debt and it moved from 2% or 1% to 7%. You're talking about tens of millions of US dollars more in servicing costs. Now that we've seen the signal, I saw the Feds in the US saying that interest rates have peaked and they want to work now to reduce interest rates. It's now wise to fix your interest rates at that high level now, because the trend is interest rates would lower. So if you lock in at a high fixed price now, you then have problems in the future because you locked in there already when the variable rates start falling. So you have to assess the markets all the time. So it's not a straightforward thing, you know. But I don't see any problem with making this info available. I don't see any problem making it available. But please, when you analyze it in its fullness. Because sometimes people look for a scandal or a PR moment out of it. It can't be done that way. It has to be analyzed in the context of a debt strategy which we have, and a debt strategy that allows us to fulfill the development aspirations of our people. You're not borrowing. You talk about not having money. I met a guy, he came in from abroad, and he said, I had an agreement. Are you interested in continuing the project, the agreement we had with APNU? And I said, what agreement? He said, well, I had an understanding that they would build 10 ministries at a cost of $200 million, high rises for ministries. So that's $2 billion US dollars. So I said to him, no, we are not building, maybe with the exception of housing, which we have to move out of now. We have to find a place. We're not building any more buildings for government. The president will work out of the same office, etc. That's $2 billion US dollars. So I said to him, no. And so obviously he thinks I'm backward because we don't want these nice shining buildings and stuff. That's more than the gas to energy project that will cut electricity prices by half and allow us to supply this country with coking gas and be able to export coking gas. That is how it would have been spent. And it fits right into APNU philosophy. Bright, shiny things. Bright, shiny things. New vehicles, all of this. A show. On the events on the APNU, I didn't tell you, you should see the budget for national events. A massive, massive amounts of money. Big shows and all of that sort of thing. So it's not having money alone. It's how you use it, what you see as priority. That matters. You can have a lot of money and then we've seen how many examples of oil producing countries in the world where they're poorer now because I've gone to many of these, I wouldn't call names, but presidential palaces, as soon as they get the oil money, a massive presidential palace. I've gone to about 6 of them. You should see the opulence in these places, producing oil. Soon as they get poor, you drive down the back street and people don't have anything to eat. They don't have a place to live. And that is what happens often if you don't have a grounded mindset. So this is important. Yes, please.
Shaquan Gill, DPI. Dr. Jagdeo, if I can just take you back a little bit to the conversation surrounding salary increases. People have also said that...
where, Jason, if at any time the president needs to find out what's going on in St. Vincent, so if he needs to come on, just let me know, I'll end this. Right, because I just got a report here, but... Yes, please. Sorry about that.
Sure. So on the conversation of 2 questions on the conversation of salary increases, people have also said that a lot of the new infrastructure that we're currently building is being done via loans, and it would therefore mean that there's more room from the $1 billion to pay out salary increases. How would you respond to something?
Yes. But if you look at, I've already calculated just 4 categories of expenditure that total $70 billion. When I look at the wages and salaries, the 15,000 persons who were hired, the children grant, and the old age pension. 4 categories alone, $70 billion. What do they say to that? Are they saying we must take all $200 billion and just hand it out to people to eat, basically? Well, not eat, but just hand it out so that there's nothing to show for it. every cent of the highway from Georgetown to Diamond and now to Busby Dam, and then from Busby Dam we're going straight to Sue's Dyke. Hopefully we'd award that this year. Every cent of it has come from the Treasury, not a loan. Every cent of the highway from Crane to the bridge now, billions of dollars have come from the Treasury, from the budget, not loan. So all these, the 3,000 community roads that we have done have come from the budget, not a loan. I can go down the long list. The schools that we're building, the 10 schools this year that we're building, they've come from the budget and not loan. The 21,000 scholarships that we're financing have come from the budget, not loans. I can go down a long list. I don't want to belabor the point. I can show you the expenditure. Drainage and irrigation, all of these issues, they've come from the budget, not loans. Some of the big projects, yes, that's true. The big projects. But even the bridge, we put in 100 million US in the bridge. 100 million US that came of the 261 million US, it's 100 million US dollars is from the budget. The gas to energy project, over 100 million dollars there too for that project. So although it's financed from a loan, that's 100 million, that's 20 billion dollars going into that. So I could list this. People just don't have a full picture. So they just talk and talk and talk, and some serious nonsense. I'm tempted to respond, but I don't want to get bogged down into this. Next thing is I call them low life and all sorts of things.
Second question, Dr. Jagdeo.
Talk too much, yeah.
Yeah, on the question of the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy, I know you've said this already, but can you also reiterate for foreign investors who may be contemplating coming to Guyana to invest?
Yes, we have not seen a single letter from anyone who intended to come to Guyana now saying, I don't want to come because of this. They understand, they've seen the statements coming out of every country in the world that supports Guyana on this border issue. They're not deferring their investments, and people who are here have not said a single thing to us about their concern that they would have to leave Guyana or anything. So as I said before, exercise of sovereignty over the 83,000 square miles that belong to all of us is the mandate of this government. Every inch of that territory that belongs to the people of this country.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jagdeo, Anasa Williams, Kaiser News. Just 3 quick questions.
Sure.
Firstly, the recent salary increases for public servants amounts to US 35 million, but we have seen in the Auditor General's report that the government has waived $540 million to oil companies for last year. Can you give us an explanation for this?
So, if you look at that, the question you should have asked Mr. Stacia is this inconsistent with the agreement that was signed in 2016? Because that agreement is what determines the concessions. So it is entirely consistent. They have not gotten anything outside of that agreement. So it's not a new issue. It is the same old issue, and about whether the agreement was a good one or not. And we can engage in that debate forever. We have already stated our position on the agreement. So that's why I said to Delcia, Rodriguez, and Maduro, we ourselves have criticized the agreement. We ourselves have criticized the 18 million. You don't need to come and tell us this. This is our family fight here between us and APNU. We know that we know that it's bad, but we are a free country and we can say this openly, and we can choose to change it or not to change it. And if you change it, it will have consequences. And so we have opted deliberately not to do that. So everything you read here, it's like circular, right? Because those concessions are derived from the agreement.
Secondly, coming to the non-oil sector, taxes waived by government to businesses and investors amounted to more than half of what GRA had collected in revenues for last year, 2022.
I didn't get taxes.
Taxes waived by government to businesses.
The same point you're making, but for this is generally now, not with the
this is the non-oil sector.
Yes, the non-oil sector. So the question is, do you give concessions or you don't give concessions to get economic growth? So we could reduce this to zero if we have no investment in the country. You get zero, you don't give any concession because you have zero investment. So you don't have concessions to give. But you also don't have the economic activity which then generates revenue. So we could have easily left the 14% VAT on machinery and equipment. We could have left it there, machinery and equipment, but what would likely happen? You wouldn't, our local people may not want to invest in mining, they may not invest in forestry, they may not buy the tractor or the combine. Then you have a shrinkage of economic output. So in every country, if you go around the world, what we do is not unique. In fact, in the United States of America, in some sectors, President Biden has just passed a $379 billion bill called the Inflation Reduction Act. Most of the money in that bill is to give to people in some sectors to make investments in renewable energy. To give them directly grants, not now waiving taxes, but to give them public money to invest there. That was just passed in the US. If you go in the entire CARICOM and you ask them, how did your hotel get built here? Did you give any concession? They will show you the list of concessions because you want the hotel built. Here too, we have a 10 years tax holiday for hotels because we recognize that often the revenue stream in the first 10 years because of occupancy, etc., will not sustain the cost of repaying for the hotel, the massive the outlay of capital at the beginning. So you have to make the projects viable. And the way of making it viable is to accord fiscal concessions to investors. The Kaichon News was one time arguing for fiscal concessions. They wanted their printing press free of taxes. You recall that? Just Google that. Big controversy with government. Why did they want? And they manufacture lies, not output. They don't manufacture plantain or cassava or something like that, or any product. They manufacture lies, and they wanted fiscal concessions there too. It's a normal thing. So you want output, you have to do some things.
And lastly, Venezuela has doubled their budget for 2024, and they have set aside funds to, quote unquote, defend the Essequibo, but we know that it's just to annex our region. How do you respond to this?
Well, I think it's what we've been saying is they have pursued annexation by decree. And one of the reasons why the president is currently engaged with them, all of these matters will be brought to the attention of our partners around the world. In fact, they've been brought to their attention. We see this as not consistent with keeping our zone as one of peace. And that is the subject of the discussion today. I don't want to comment further on this at this point in time, but we see it as an aggressive act.
Thank you. Oh, and
That's
one
it,
more
all
little
right. All right,
thing.
go ahead, go ahead.
Can you just tell us how soon, or give us like a time frame when those fixed interest rates may be made public?
Oh, I don't know. I'm going to talk to Ashley Singh, but like with those big contracts that you all wanted, mining contracts, we made them public. I didn't see you do much with them. You know, so too at some point in time, somehow there was like a bogey, a zombie in the cupboard with these big contracts. So when we released them, nothing happened. So we at some point in time, that will happen too.
Luan Williams, DPI.
Yeah.
We saw the GPL generators and transformers arriving yesterday. Can you say how soon those will be installed?
You recall what I said? We had assurances from Dubai, from the GPL management, and based on reports to Minister Indar, that it would be between the 11th to the 15th, that they should be up and running. The president had these assurances too. I had them, I called them. And now the generators have arrived. So I would prefer, we're pressing them hard, but I would prefer if you get the exact time from them. Because the last thing I don't want to do is to give people at my press conferences timelines based on what they tell me, and then I have to walk this back several times. It infuriates me. It infuriates me because they say to you, this is by the date, and then there's a slippage, and people think we set out to mislead them. We made a significant investment because we wanted to ensure that there's more power in the country, and all of this is just, we may have to invest even more before the gas to energy project comes on stream, but that will solve all of this definitively.
Dr. Jagdeo, Lazina Yearwood, Newsroom. Last week, several articles coming out from Suriname stated that President Santoki met with President Ali and yourself in 2 meetings. Could you confirm this? And if it is indeed true, could you say whether or not there is any update for the fishermen who plied their trade in the upper quarantine area that is concerning the 150 fishing licenses?
I didn't meet with President Ali and President Santoki at the same time. They may have met. I met President Santoki separately. None of those issues were discussed. We spoke generally about the need for us to work together in the region. I said to him, I hope we move forward with the bridge quickly because, you know, we've had some progress on that, and the need for us to engage further. And he said, yes, we should do that. So we had a meeting. We didn't go into specifics, so I don't want to report on that. I have not asked President Ali about the details of their conversation, but I met with him separately in Dubai. Yes, that's the case then. Thank you very much.